Today, what I'm going to be talking about is how to use Zotero to manage references and digital files for your academic projects. So who is this talk for? This talk is for anyone who needs to perhaps keep class reading notes for papers that they will write later or for comprehensive exams. Zotero is excellent for organizing digital files and notes. So it's good to get it started early in your academic career and use it as a tool throughout all of your coursework and exams. But it's also very useful for anyone who needs to write several research papers, a thesis, or is an academic who will kind of be in this for the long haul to write over the time of their career. So I'm going to cover all of the bullet points there below, kind of give you an overview of Zotero and how it works, show you how to back up your database, how to use a couple of plugins that are very useful for managing the actual PDFs and for also finding and adding new PDFs to your database, and then also citing while you write. And towards the end, I'll show you how to work with citation styles when you're ready to submit your research to different journals or need to format your citations in particular fashion. So the history of Zotero is a long one, actually, and it originally started as a plugin for Firefox, the Firefox browser, but now is most commonly used as a standalone piece of software that you download from the website there, the Zotero website, and install on your laptop or desktop computer. So you can get a version of Zotero either for a Windows machine or for a Mac operating system, and you essentially go to that link and it will identify what type of computer or operating system you're using and allow you to download the executable that you will then install on your local hard drive. The important thing to understand about Zotero is that essentially it's a piece of software that creates a local database of all of your research materials. And so what it's going to do is it's going to have this database that has all the metadata. So the authors, the title, the publisher, the place of publication, all of that information about the books and articles and other media that you'll want to reference when you're writing later on. The other thing that the database allows or is able to do is to connect that metadata to specific PDFs and documents that you have on your hard drive. And then with additional plugins, you can set up these plugins to automatically rename those PDFs so that your local library is kind of organized in a standardized way. It will also give you some ability to send or export PDFs to, say, a tablet, and then re-import them with your notes or highlights that you've done of a PDF and extract those highlights as text or notes in the database itself. So it has a lot of additional features, but the core function of it is to create a local database, kind of like the library catalog on the library website, but this is kind of your private library database that has a bunch of metadata about the articles that you have collected or that you have read or that you want to cite in your work. And so fundamentally, you just have to remember that that piece of software has to be open and running whenever you want to, for instance, kind of browse the internet and add new records or add new files to it, or when you're using one of the plugins to add citations as you write in Word, for instance. So some of these additional features that really make Zotero extra useful for us are going to be plugins or extensions that you add to Zotero or to your Microsoft Word program or what have you to get these additional features to make it an even more powerful tool for your writing. So I'm going to start by focusing on the database itself. So essentially, when you use Zotero or interact with the database, it looks like this. I'll just kind of flip over now to my Zotero. You can see I've got a whole bunch of different collections. So this is my local library. These are all the things in my Zotero. I've got over 7,000 items. But then you can also create in your database separate, what Zotero calls collections. And so these would be for different projects or different papers that you might be writing if you want to keep all of your PDFs or all of your records in separate folders. And this is kind of like a stylistic or a personal preference, whether or not you organize everything into collections, excuse me. in part because whenever you go up here, you see everything regardless of what collection an item is in. And so it's, a point of personal preference, because some people might want to just leave everything in their main folder and then use the search to find a particular item. And other people, like email, want to file their emails into separate folders and keep track of things that way. So that's really up to you. That's your preference. And so each of these items is one of the records in my database. And then you can see over here in the default view, you can see this is all the metadata that is related to that article. You can also, as I mentioned here, you can set up a Zotero account. So you go to Zotero.org and you create a personal account, and I have a typo in my spelling there, but you can create an account on Zotero that will actually, for free, create a backup of the database. So it won't back up your PDFs or the specific documents, but it will take the database itself and sync it to the Zotero website and create a backup of the database for your records. And so here I'm just explaining where you go in to set up that backup. So you kind of have to have a username that you create on the Zotero website, and you link the account this way, and you choose to sync automatically the database. And so it will periodically kind of automatically make sure that your backup of the database itself is up to date. And then you can check this full text sync to have it sync the full text. You can, for $25 a year, buy additional storage if you wanted to have your PDFs and other full text documents synced and backed up as well. But I'm going to talk to you in a minute about how you can use other services that you already have access to, like Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, or even Mac Drive, if you're a faculty member or staff member at McMaster, and back up your PDFs to one of those services, but keep your database backed up to the Zotero website. And so then up here in the top right corner, you'll see this little icon. If you ever want to sync or make sure that your database is backed up, you just kind of click that and it runs. And it's probably going to give me an error because I think I'm trying to back up too many things given my current plan. The important thing to remember about your database is that the database itself should not be stored in one of these backup services, because Zotero will tell you it increases the risk that the database itself might get corrupted as the database is being backed up to one of those other services. So what I'm showing you here on this screen is that if you go to Zotero Preferences Sync, and if you're a Windows user, this will be under File and then Preferences or Options and then Sync. If you go to these tabs for Sync and Advanced, it will show you where the data directory location is. And so this data directory location, this should be the thing that is not inside Dropbox, Google Drive, or OneDrive folder. So this is the location of your local copy of your database that will then be synced back to the Zotero services. And so this is one that even if you have all of your other work files in Dropbox or one of these services, you want this path here to be outside of that. And instead, you want to use Zotero itself as a way to back up the database to avoid issues with corruption. And again, you can back up your database for free to the Zotero website. So that's the database itself, that you want to make sure that you've stored it in a local place on your computer that you can find if you ever need to, but more importantly, that you know how to set up the syncing so that once you have, like I do, over 7,000 entries, if your computer crashes or you have some sort of catastrophe, you know that a version of your database is still backed up somewhere. Now, the other part of Zotero that's really important is the actual PDFs or files or digital copies of materials that are linked to those records. So for instance, if we come back here and look at my Zotero, and I'm just trying to find my mouse, that's probably not an appropriate one to use as an example, but if you look here at this record, you'll see underneath that record, it has a link to a PDF. And I have a PDF that is attached to that. And if I go and click on it, it will open up the PDF in from my local hard drive. And so this is the other powerful part of Zotero, is that not only can you have all of these references in your database, but you can also have attached to each one of those records a PDF, and you can even have multiple PDFs, or I do quantitative research, and so sometimes I have the PDF, and then I might also have the data file, if there's a replication data file, and I will attach that as well to the record so that I have that all in one place. So the important thing to understand about the PDFs, or your actual library, is that you can and should store that in some different place that actually gets backed up regularly. So if you look here down at the bottom, I say if you go to kind of File and then Preferences, Advanced, in the same screen here up at the top, it has the linked attachment-based directory. And what this is saying is this is indicating where you want your particular PDFs that are attached to the records to be stored. And you'll notice here that I use Dropbox, and so I store all my PDFs in a folder inside my Dropbox that is essentially called Dropbox Work and then Research-Bibliographies. So this could be any other path on your hard drive. It could be in your Mac drive. It could be in your Google Drive, wherever it is that you have some other backup service. And what this does is make sure that you're backing up your database to the Zotero servers, and then you're backing up your PDFs to another backup service where you have storage capacity. So that is often very confusing to people, that you have this kind of the database and then you have your PDFs. But it is quite possible and actually advisable to store them in two separate places and back them up in two different ways. So this is where you would go to set your preference for where you want your PDFs to be stored. Now, this library of local PDFs, which I mentioned here, should be backed up in your Dropbox or Google Drive. And essentially what Zotero is doing then is creating its own local database that kind of manages and index all of those documents there. To make that management easier, there is what's called a plugin or an extension that will actually help you and give you additional control over those files. So basically, I have here the link to Zotfile that has additional instructions about how to install it and add it. And also from the library at Berkeley University, they have some additional guides about how to set it up. But if you come here and look at Tools, Add-ons, you will see I have two add-ons that I use. One is Zotero for Word, which I will talk about in a minute, and then this other one is Zotfile. And so what Zotfile does is once you have Zotfile installed, it gives you additional preferences here under Zotfile Preferences that allow you to fine-tune how Zotero and Zotfile interact with your PDFs. So I have over here a couple of items to highlight. So there's kind of the general settings. Here you can have a folder that Zotero kind of watches for new PDFs or new downloads, and then it will prompt you in Zotero to kind of, do you want to add this PDF to your Zotero if Zotero is open? In my experience, that the reliability of that is not 100%. It doesn't always watch actively and prompt you as you would like it to do. But I have it set up so that it will watch my downloads folder. The other thing that you have to set is where the files are stored. And again, this needs to match the location that I showed you previously in the main preference settings. And so this is why it can get very confusing. But basically, this is the same place where all my PDFs live, which is in my Dropbox folder, and then in Work, and then Research Bibliographies. There's another tab you'll see in the same set of preferences for Zotfile that allow you to kind of send and retrieve PDFs from a tablet. So let's say you have an iPad or an Android tablet that you like to use to read and annotate PDFs. Even if you don't have that, but you wanted to use this feature to have kind of like a separate little subfolder of to read files that you wanted to kind of keep track of, these are the things that I need to read and take notes on, and then import them back into your Zotero, you can use this tablet settings feature for that purpose, even if you don't have a tablet. And the idea here is that inside the folder where I store all my PDFs, I create a subfolder for my tablet. And in fact, I'm going off script, so this is dangerous, but especially because I can't see my mouse. But if I come up here to work, I can't get it to. The easier thing would be to come over here and have Zotero do it for me. I can't see my mouse. Here, there it goes. So if I go to Zotfile preferences, and then I go to tablet settings and I ask it to show me the folder, you can see here, this is actually the folder where I have set up a subfolder for my iPad. And then I have, this is my main folder here. This is my library of all my PDFs. And so essentially these are in the same folder that I've designated for my Zotero to store all my PDFs. And so one is this files is my main library, and iPad is a set or a separate smaller place where I designate files that I want to kind of go back and forth to my iPad. Or it could be if you wanted the files that you're going to read and comment on and annotate and then import back. It's also notable that I have put these in the same folder together, but they don't have to be, right? So it could be that you put them in completely different places on your hard drive because maybe you don't have enough room in your Dropbox to back up certain things, or you kind of have reasons for storing things in different places. I just happen to put these both in the same folder. So the idea here between in this part of Zotfile and what it can do for you is you set this designated place that's my to read or my iPad folder. And what you can do is you can allow and set up these things to make it such that when you use Zotfile and Zotero to, quote, send files to your tablet, it then say you open the things on your tablet or even on your desktop and you do some annotations in Acrobat or Skim or whatever software you use to read PDFs, and then you save it into that special folder for the tablet or your to read folder. You have this option down here of additional options where it'll save a copy of the annotated file with a suffix. So then you can go back to your main, you can import those files back into your main library. So move them from the iPad folder back to your main files folder. And you'll have two copies of the PDF, right? You'll have the original one that you downloaded. And then you'll have another one that has this new name added to it, this extension, that will let you know that this is the one that you took your highlights on. And as an instructor, I find this really useful because I can then, for instance, see the version or have a version that I might share with my students, but then I would have the other version that I know is my personal copy where I have the annotations. The other thing it will do is it has this option here to automatically extract annotations when getting PDFs back from tablet. And what that feature does is when you import things back into your Zotero, it will essentially add in this notes section of Zotero any of the text that you have highlighted or any notes or comments that you have added to the PDF. It will add them here in this notes section attached to that file. And there are ways that you can kind of export all your notes attached to certain sets of files. So that would be particularly useful if you're using some sort of annotation tool in Acrobat, for instance, and then you want to have those notes so that you can print them out later to study for an exam or to reflect on the key parts of the highlights or the things that you think are most interesting from those readings. So in practice, how you would do this is if you have kind of a set of things that you want to read, you would then right-click it, come down here to this manage attachments, which you only have if you've installed Zotfile, and you can send to tablet. And what that does is it will take any PDFs attached to these like 15 records and copy them into that iPad folder. Then I open them up from within that iPad folder and I read them on my iPad, or I read them on my computer and highlight them. And then when I'm done, what I have to do is I have to come back here and go to, then if I had items in my tablet folder that were available, I don't right now, I could click on this get from tablet, and then Zotero and Zotfile will pull those PDFs back in, reattach them to the record as like a second one that's going to have my initials at the end. And then it's going to extract also, if I've set up the preferences the way I showed you, it will also have here all the notes that I've taken, or all the text that I've highlighted in the PDF will also be here with the page number that it came from. But all of that takes setting up, in part because you have to know, first of all, to get this Zotfile tool, and then you have to go through each one of these settings to kind of set them up. The other thing that Zotfile will do has an option to allow you to rename your PDFs. So if you've downloaded PDFs from library websites before, or journal websites, they often are kind of funky and don't make a lot of sense. One of the other nice things that Zotfile does is it will automatically rename any of the PDFs that you download and add to your library. And you can choose the format that you want to have. So in my case, I have it be author, year, and then the title of the article. That is my preferred way of having all of my files renamed in this files folder. So you can see, I did not hand rename all of these myself. I like that. Who has time for that? No one has time for that. What I did instead was I have this Zotfile tool that has these settings, and you'll be able to see the recording of this talk, so you can like look and scrutinize these settings more closely if you want. But I use these settings to automatically rename all my PDFs. And indeed, that's one of the options. If you right-click on something and it doesn't do it automatically, you can here have it rename the attachment if it hasn't automatically renamed it when you added it. And you can do that to a whole bunch of them at once. And so it's a way to kind of tidy up your PDF library and have everything be named in a consistent fashion, so that you can, if you wanted to, find it just by looking through the PDFs themselves. In the advanced settings for Zotfile, I don't think that I have changed any of these settings at all, and I just left them as the defaults. But I have them here in the slideshow so that you can kind of double check and see if you use Zotfile to set up your Zotero. So as I've already explained, again, just to kind of reiterate, the way to kind of use Zotfile to maximum effect is to use this feature where you're able to kind of highlight and select and send certain files to a tablet, which really is essentially putting them, excuse me, into a different folder on your hard drive. And then you either access them from the tablet or from your computer in that folder, annotate them, comment on them, things like that. And then later on, after you're done, you come back to Zotfile and Zotero, and you use this feature down here, get from tablet, to pull them back in. So the key thing that can kind of be confusing about this process, and excuse me for the telephone in the background, but the confusing thing about this process can sometimes be that you have to use Zotero as the tool that's moving these files back and forth to get the full effect, instead of you dragging them yourself from one folder to another. So those are some key features about Zotero, the tool itself, and the plugin Zotfile that are really, I think, essential to both kind of managing your PDFs, keeping them tidy and organized, making it so that you can annotate them and get those annotations back into the database with the least amount of work, and that you can have your PDFs and the database from Zotero kind of backed up in using either the Zotero website itself or one of the other services you already use to back up your work, because you should always have a backup, because 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So you should always have as many backups as possible to your work. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about other ways that you'll end up using Zotero once you have it set up. The first one is kind of finding the research that you want to import into Zotero. It would also be a huge pain if for every item in your of those 7,000 items in my database, I had to hand type the title and the name. I would not, no one has time for that. That's not the point of this. Instead, what you want to do is you want to get one of these connectors or plugins that will work with your browser to automatically download and import references. So in this case, I regularly use Chrome anyway for my online browsing, and I have this tool or this connector installed, which is essentially an extension or plugin to Chrome that allows me to add PDFs and the citations to my database more easily. So for instance, I'm using Google Scholar and I do a search like this and I find a couple of articles that I'm interested in and maybe a book that I'm interested in. And so what I've done here is I've opened these items in new tabs to show how the plugin works. So here's this article that I'm potentially interested in. In this case, because I have set up my Google Scholar to know that I always want to use the McMaster library, and there is a web page on the McMaster library website that shows you how to set up your browser and your Google Scholar for off-campus access. And I think I have the link for it later in the slide so that you'll have access to that as well. But once you've done that, essentially, here I am. I've got this article that I'm interested in. I want to add it to my Zotero. All I do is I come up here, which is where the plugin is. It says Save to Zotero. I do that. Here, what collection or what thing do I want to put it in? In this case, I'm going to put it in my citations folder, and then I just hit return, and it automatically will show up here at the top in my most recently modified. And it will add the PDF, and it renamed the PDF automatically because I have Zotfile installed and configured to do that. I come over here and I go, oh, here's this book. I don't know if our library has it, who knows, but I want to kind of add it to my list. You'll see it looks like a little book. And again, I can add this book to whatever category I want. I hit enter. I hit enter. And it does that. And before the session started, I went ahead and downloaded that, and you click here. If I go to info, it has all the information about the book. Now, sometimes the information on the internet is only as good as the site that you get it from. And so there will be mistakes, and sometimes you will have to manually clean up entries because things will not be formatted the way that you want them to. And so it's not going to be 100% because not all publishers are equally good about updating their metadata and making it work really well. So you then kind of have the PDFs with only a couple of clicks, right? And here's another one. I want to click that and then hit, let me see if I just want to put it somewhere else. Let's say I want to put it there. Now, normally when I do this, with a new tool or a new paper that I'm downloading, you'll see a little pop-up in the bottom right that shows you that Zotero is adding it to the collection. And remember, Zotero does have to be open and kind of running in the background for this to work. Otherwise, you'll get an error that says, oh, wait, I can't seem to find Zotero. You can also, even if you're in a Google Scholar search like this, you'll see that now my little icon up here looks like a folder. That's because it has kind of listed all of them. And I could, if I wanted, kind of go through and just collect a bunch of them, depending on, and then hit OK. And you see now it's adding all of those. And it's not necessarily going to add full text for all of them if, in fact, we don't have full text access. And I have found that it does take a little bit of tinkering to make sure that you automatically get the full text from our library. But let's say you have something like this where the full text doesn't automatically attach. Then what do you do? Well, you can also just download the PDF to your downloads folder or to wherever you want to download it. So let's see, download as PDF. I have here, I have to log into my library. Now this might not work because I have a bunch of browser installations installed, and so the library website doesn't like it when I'm trying to do things with all my browser extensions. There we go. So now I have the PDF. The other option is maybe I just download this PDF to my desktop, for instance. And now I want to get it into my folder or into my Zotero. I can just go to my desktop, and there's that PDF that I had. I can just go here. And here's that PDF that I downloaded. I want it to go to the citations collection, so I'm just going to drag it there. And there it is. You saw it for a second. It was there, but it automatically created the metadata because now I have 2 copies of it. So this is the other thing, is you can, if you have a collection of PDFs, you can just drag them into this pane here, and Zotero will try to automatically see if it can find the metadata on the internet for that PDF. Now that doesn't always happen, right? So here, for instance, is a document that I downloaded from the American Economics Association website. And the other way to get the metadata is to right-click on it and say retrieve metadata for PDF. And in this case, it didn't find it. And so if I want to cite this particular PDF, I'm going to have to create a parent item, and then I'm going to come after here and say this is a report. And I'm going to have to manually enter all that nonsense in here to be able to cite it. But the point is for most of your PDFs that come from academic sources or even webs like blogs, if it's a WordPress blog or it's a newspaper or something like that, for the most part, you can either usually use the plugin on Chrome or just drag the PDF in, and Zotero will kind of automatically, if it can, go find the metadata and pre-populate that for you. So there are a lot of different workflow strategies to get your items into Zotero and to get your database populated that don't involve you hand typing the information. The easiest one, like I said, is to have one of these tools installed, the connector installed, and then use this button up here to get it added. And depending on the library settings and certain journals, I have found sometimes for JSTOR, you usually have to accept the terms the first time. And then after that, once you're kind of logged in and have downloaded one from JSTOR in a session, it will kind of remember and it will automatically download them. But different publishers sometimes have different ways that their websites are set up. And so kind of the worst case scenario is you click on this, it creates the record, the item in your Zotero, and then you have to go get the PDF and drag it in and attach it to it just by kind of dragging it onto the item. That's kind of the most labor intensive, aside from these kind of oddball, usually like reports or things like that that don't have metadata embedded in them or easily accessible. So this kind of outlines those steps that I went through. This is the website that I mentioned before. It's really important to kind of, especially because we're all working off campus now, to make sure that you understand how to set up the Google Scholar to work with the McMaster Library and to be logged in and automatically be able to kind of have this system work more smoothly as if you were on campus. And then this last point is, like I said, I like to have different collections that I put all my PDFs in. But, you don't have to do that. You can also just search or dump them all in one place, but you can kind of have different collections for different courses or comprehensive exam or certain research projects that you happen to be working on. So that covers how to add new records and new PDFs to your Zotero. The next thing you'll want to do is, after you've done all this work to set up your Zotero and get everything so it backs up automatically, and you know how to get new articles and items into your Zotero, you'll want to actually be able to use it as you write. And so in order to be able to do that, you need to add a plugin for Microsoft Word. There are plugins also available for Google Docs and OpenOffice, although I understand that they are a little bit less stable and don't work as well. But at McMaster, all faculty and students and staff have access to Microsoft Word. And so, politics aside, the easiest thing to do is to just use Word and install the plugin for Word. So once you've done that, there's kind of a link here for tools and add-ons in the Zotero that will take you to the Microsoft Word plugin. But once you have that set up, your Word will then look like this. You will have all of a sudden in your ribbon, a ribbon for Zotero. And again, remember, you have to have Zotero open and running for that to work really like it's supposed to. And the idea here is I can write a sentence and then add a citation. And one thing that you can do is you can add a citation this way. It will prompt you to pick what type of citation style you want. I personally tend to prefer author date Chicago manual style, but there are a lot of other ones that are kind of automatically included with Zotero, and I'm going to show you at the very end how to find other ones or create your own if you prefer. And you essentially want to leave the citations as fields, which allow them to update every time you work on the document. When you have a very long document like a thesis or a book manuscript, you may want to uncheck this box and then manually run an update periodically, because it can really slow down your Word depending on the size of your database, the size of the citations, and the document. But for a typical research paper or journal length article, you should be able to leave these defaults as they are. So the first time you go to cite something, it'll ask you to pick how you want it cited. And then this red window pops up. And this is the window where you say, oh, I'm going to cite Dion, Mitchell. And all of the articles that have, me in them are going to come up from my library. And then you can see that they're in different collections as well. So I tend to have multiple copies of things because I've put them in different collections. So I'm going to cite this one here, and I hit enter. And boom, it put in my reference. And then if I wanted to edit it, I could just click in there and do that, and it comes back up. Now let's say I wanted it to instead refer to a particular figure, right? So figure 2, I can do that. If I wanted to preface it with C also, I can do that. You can also suppress the author if you wanted to do something more like, Dion et al. Argue that I can write a sentence and add a citation, and then it will, eliminate the author but have all of this figure. One way to make this even more efficient is to not use this button here, but to set keyboard shortcuts. So I have set custom keyboard shortcuts for Control-Option-A to add a citation and E to edit a citation. And so as I'm writing, it's very easy for me because I just use a keyboard shortcut and that little window will pop up. Then when you're done writing your paper at the end, or you want to type references, and you want to insert a page break and have your references, the way that you would insert your references would be to click this button, and it should, there it goes. And it puts the entire citation right there in the Chicago Manual of Style format based on its scanning of the document to find all of these fields. Now let's say the journal that you wanted to submit to originally was Chicago Manual of Style, but now you're going somewhere else and they want you to do APA. You can do that, right? You could just go in here and change it. And then down here, it has automatically updated that to APA. that is the real time saver, especially if you're like me and you submit lots of things to journals that gets rejected and then have to be sent back. Now, how is it that these citation styles work, and how do you get more citation styles? Like I said, Zotero comes with a number of citation styles already built in. The basic idea is that there are these files that you can download from the internet that have already been kind of pre-configured for a number of different journals. And so if you're interested in publishing in a journal that is likely very popular and very well known, someone else has probably gone to the trouble of creating one of those template files and making it available for you. And so essentially in Zotero, in the preferences section, right, Zotero file preferences or options, and then in this site tab, you can even see get additional styles, right? And if you click on that link, it'll take you to this page where there's a whole list of them. And you just download whatever the file is, and then when you're ready to add it, you click this plus button, and you can upload the file that you downloaded and import it into your Zotero, and then all of a sudden that new citation style will appear there. I have had a couple of times where I was submitting to a journal that had a very specialized style that didn't exist yet in the available public databases. And there is a way that you can go in and take like a nearby style, something that's very close, and modify it just enough to match the needs of that new style or that new journal that you want to submit to. The last thing I'll say is that if you work in LaTeX or Markdown, you can also use Zotero as a reference tool for that, and it essentially just entails exporting your library as a BibTeX file and saving it into the folder where you're writing your paper.